Today I'm going to show you how to use the Street Frames Chainlink Fence Overlays pack. Let's jump into Photoshop and I'll show you how to use them. Now I'm going to preface this by saying there's a number of different ways that we can do this in Photoshop, but I'm going to show you a couple of examples on how an absolute beginner who has no Photoshop experience can use these overlays. So I'm going to start here with my city image. We want to go to the folder on our computer where we've downloaded the Street Frames overlays to. And you'll notice that they're first divided into two folders, landscape and portrait. As we're working with a landscape shot, I'm going to click open the landscape folder. We've then got two other folders, no backlight and backlight. I'll explain this in more detail in a little bit and when I show you the examples, but basically backlight is a lighting effect behind the fence, which is great for daytime shots. And no backlight is plain with no lighting effects, great for nighttime or evening shots. So seeing as this is a daytime shot, we're going to go into backlight. And we can see our PNG files here. Now each of them has the same naming convention, which I'll quickly go through with you. So we've got SF to denote street frames. We've got the orientation of the shot, landscape or portrait. We've got the proximity of the shot, which will be close, mid, wide shot. We've got the hole description. This will be hole, large hole, extra small hole, or even no hole. And then we've got the lighting effect. So we'll either say no backlight or backlight. And this will be the same for all of the files. So for this one, I'm going to choose the Street Frames landscape close shot with a curtain hole and a backlight. Simply drag it and drop it onto your image inside Photoshop. Once I've dropped my image into Photoshop, I'll need to scale it to kind of cover the image behind it. So we're going to grab these tiny little boxes here and we're just going to scale it out. Once I've scaled it out, we reposition it to where we want it. And when we're happy, we click the tick icon up here. Now you could just leave it like this, but what we want to do is we want to blend the overlay with the image behind it to make it look really nice and realistic. Now, as I said, there's a number of ways we can do this, but we're going to keep it nice and simple. We're going to go down here to our Effects tab, and we're going to click Hue and Saturation. What this is going to do is going to create a new effects layer above our Street Frame overlay layer. Now, if we were to just adjust the controls here, as you can see, it's affecting the whole image. Well, we don't want that. We only want it to affect the Street Frame layer. And to do this, we want to clip the effect to the layer below it. So make sure that our effect layer is above our Street Frame layer, and then click this icon here. And that's going to ensure that any adjustments we make are only changing the layer that it's clipped to. Okay, now we want to subtly change the colors to match the image behind. So we're going to click Colorize. We're going to adjust the hue until we find something suitable. Generally for a daytime shot, it's going to be a slightly warmer effect. Depends what the shot in the background looks like. So we'll keep it slightly warm and orangey about there. I'm also going to turn the saturation down just a little bit. And that looks good. We'll click the arrows here to hide this window. Now you could just leave it like that, but we're going to take it a little bit further. I want to add some kind of vignette just on the frame. So I'm going to click here to create a new layer. I'm going to go over here to activate my brush tool. I can change my brush size up here. We want to make sure that it's got a gradient blend on it. And we can adjust the brush size up here or by manually entering in the brush size. Make sure our color swatch down here is set to black and click OK. Now if I just paint on the layer as it is, you can see it's affecting both of the layers. And that's not what we want. So I'm going to hit Control or Command and Z twice just to undo that. We only want to affect the fence layer. And to do this, we're going to go over to our Street Frame overlay layer. I'm going to go to the little preview window here and I'm going to hold Control or Command and then I'm going to click the layer. And what that's going to do is it's going to select the Street Frame layer as a mask. Now with this layer selected, it means we can now draw just around the edges, not in the middle, just around the edges and the corners to darken them. Once we've done it, we hit Control or Command and D to deselect the layer. You can see that these are slightly too dark, so we're going to go up here to our opacity and we're going to adjust it to something that we think looks good. Doesn't have to be too much. And if I click on the little eye icon here, it will change the visibility of the layer. So you can see the effect it's having on and off. Now again, we could leave it just like this. Some people might want to keep it just this way now that we've added a vignette and colorized the fence frame layer. But just to add a little bit more depth, a little bit more realism to the shot, I'm going to add a blur effect to the fence to create this nice depth of field. So to do that, I'm going to click on all three of these layers by clicking on one, holding the Shift button, and then clicking on the others. I'm then going to right click on one of these layers and click Convert to Smart Object. Once I've done that, I'm going to go up to Filter, Blur, and Gaussian Blur. We can then adjust the blur amount here to suit our image. I don't want it to be too blurry where we can't tell that it's even a fence, but I don't want it to be not blurry enough that it doesn't create that depth effect. So it's a really good, somewhere nicely in the middle. I think that looks good. And click OK. And that's our image. So if I click on the eye icon, we've got before and we've got after. Now, if I wanted to go in and change any of the color effects that I've done on the fence frame layer after converting it to this smart object, I simply double click the preview window here, and it's going to open up those three files that we collapsed into a smart object. I can then go in and change any of the properties here like I did before. And once I've done that, I just want to make sure that I go File, Save that smart object layer, and it will apply the effect. And that's looking really good. So I'm going to go through it again really quickly just so you can see how simple it is. With that layer selected, let's just hit delete. Go to our folder, select our fence frame layer, drag it on. Grab the corners to scale it. Grab the middle of it to adjust the position. Click the tick icon. Create a new hue saturation effect layer. Clip it to the layer below. Click colorize. Change the hue of the color to suit the image. I'm going to turn the saturation down a little bit and the lightness. I'm then going to go and create a new layer for our vignette. I'm going to hold Control or Command and click on this little preview window of our overlay layer to select it. I'm going to make sure that my brush tool is selected and that my color swatch is set to black. I'm going to paint around the corners and the edges. And then Control or Command D to deselect it. Change the opacity of it. I'm then going to hold the Shift button and select each of these layers. Right click on them and click Convert to Smart Object. From there, I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and adjust the blur amount radius to suit the image and hit OK. And here's our final image, before and after. Once that's done, you just go File, Save As, and choose how you want it to be saved. We can select a JPEG or whatever. Now this is a great example of a daytime shot. Let's try something a little different. We've got a nice dusk evening style shot here. And remember, if we've got a nighttime shot, then generally what we want to do is we want no backlight behind it. So I'm going to choose a medium hole with no backlight. Drag it over our image. I'm then going to scale it from the corners and reposition it. I'm going to scale it out a little bit more for this. And click the tick icon. Now the issue is with this, the fence frame layer is quite light compared to the image behind it. So there's a couple of ways that we could darken it, but a really simple way is to create a new effect layer, brightness and contrast, and clip it to the layer below and just turn that brightness down. Might turn the contrast up a touch as well. Once we've done that, we want to change the color to match the nice blue sky. So we're going to create a new hue and saturation layer. Again, we want to clip it to the layer below. We want to hit colorize and change it until we get this nice blue effect to match the sky. Let's turn the saturation down on this to make it look more natural. And I'm just going to turn the lightness down a little bit more. After this, we want a nice vignette effect on the fence frame. We're going to create a new layer. Control or Command and click on the preview window of our street frame overlay layer to select it. Go to our brush tool, make sure black is selected, and just paint around the corners and the edges. Remember, you don't want to paint in the middle, just around the corners and the edges to create this nice vignette effect. Control or Command and D to deselect it. And then turn our opacity down to something that looks good. Now you could leave it like this, or you could add a Gaussian blur to it. It's really a matter of preference. So I'm going to add a slight blur, holding the Shift button and selecting all of these layers, right-clicking on these layers and click Convert to Smart Object. Filter, Blur, Gaussian blur. Change the blur amount to something that looks good. Remember, the blurrier it is, the more depth of field effect that we have. Hit OK. And just to finish this off, this fence frame creates a really nice focus on the subject, but I want to focus it just a little bit more. So I'm going to create just my own vignette effect, which is going to go over the whole image. So we create a new layer, make sure the brush tool is selected and the black color swatch, and I'm just going to paint around these edges, creating my own kind of vignette effect. Just click to fill in some of these areas. And then we're going to go up to opacity and just turn it down to something that we think looks good. You can see without it, we've got the fence frame framing our subject and focusing on our attention, but adding a separate vignette over the whole image just really helps to narrow that focus a little bit more. I'm just going to hold Shift and select this layer. I'm going to click on the group icon down here. It's just going to put those into their own little folder and click the arrow to see what's in it. But it means I can turn off the visibility and just see our corrections before and after. And let's have a look at one final image. A nice daytime shot. So with a daytime shot, we're going to want a backlight. Let's go for a smaller hole. I'm going to drag up our corners to scale the image. I'm going to scale it quite a lot. And position it where we want. Hit the tick icon. Now this fence, again, it's really bright around here. We want it a little bit darker, so just go to our effects layers, brightness and contrast. Clip it to the layer below and turn that brightness down. Increase the contrast a little bit as well. Then to our effects layer, hue and saturation. Let's colorize it. Oh, we need to clip it to the layer below. Change the hue. Change the saturation. Just so it's what looks good to the eye. So if the saturation's all the way up here, it just doesn't look natural. It's just at a point where you think, yeah, that looks good. Turn the lightness down a little bit as well. Finally, I'm going to hold the Shift button to select all of these layers. Right click convert to smart object, filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and I'm going to have quite a heavy blur for this, about 18, just to have a really nice depth to it.